I work in places most people don't notice unless something's wrong. At Northridge International, that's the night shift control room, fluorescent quiet, glass panes that make you think you're inside the eyes of a machine, radios whispering like the building is talking to itself. If you've flown through our airport and your plane pushed back at 2:03 a.m. instead of 2:05, it's because someone in here nudged a domino you'll never see. Most nights I'm that someone. My name is Ethan Ward. I coordinate overnight operations gates, ground crews, de-icing queues, the choreography of headlights on wet concrete. My hours are elastic. I go home when the morning knows my face, sleep until the day grows bored with me, and come back when families are halfway through airports and mistakes start thinking about introducing themselves. My wife, Carrie, runs a supper club. I don't mean that metaphorically. She literally runs a 24-seat dining room in the back of a flower shop, 4 nights a week, 2 seatings, seasonal menus written in chalk. You don't book, you're invited. If you show up at the right moment, the kitchen steam smells like trust. She's good in a way that embarrasses my adjectives. When she plates a dish, people sit a little straighter, like they were caught slouching by generosity. We met in a line, like most modern miracles. The airline had canceled my flight home from a safety seminar in Phoenix. She was returning from a food conference in Santa Fe with a suitcase full of dried peppers and stories about old women who could tell you the weather by how flour behaved in their hands. I made a bad joke about the word tarmac not being real, and she corrected me in a way that still makes me want to fact-check my own heart. We married in a courthouse and threw a party in her kitchen. For years, it felt like we ran the same business with different tools. I shepherded strangers through storms. She taught strangers to trust the hunger they'd been ignoring. It began to change in winter, the way everything here begins to change. Quietly, first as a smell. On a Monday in January, after I'd worked a 20-hour run over an ice storm, I came home to find the supper club's dining room, rearranged tables pushed together like conspirators, vases with frost-green eucalyptus leaves that weren't there that morning, and a coat draped over the back of a chair. Not a woman's coat, a man's, navy. Expensive enough to pretend it wasn't trying. "Who's here?" I asked. "No one," Carrie called from the kitchen. "You're early." She came out with flour on her cheek, hair in a knot, apron printed with lemons. She kissed me like a habit we'd taught ourselves to be proud of. "You left the door unlocked," I said. "I was hauling ice," she said. "Easier." I held the coat by 2 fingers. "Do you want this in the back?" "Oh," she said, lately surprised. "That's—" She paused. "Mateo's. He dropped a bottle of wine by. He'll be back to pick it up." "Mateo?" I said. "From where?" "Importer," she said too quickly. "Italian vintages. He knows Solange from the flower shop." I wanted to say, we live in a city of 37 importers who don't leave their coats like calling cards. Instead, I said, "Right," and set the coat on the counter, which was both a petty and an honest choice. I went to shower. On the bathroom rail, a towel I didn't know hung like a rumor. It smelled like cedar and an herb I couldn't afford to pronounce. In the mirror, the look on my face explained more to me than I wanted from a mirror that early in the day. For a week, I let it be a coat and a towel, and a new name inserted into a kitchen like a garnish. Then, on a Thursday misshapen by sleet, I was in the airport lost and found, cataloging what 1,000 people forgot about themselves when they were asked to sprint. Among the wallets and chargers in a baby's shoe that faltered at the finish line, I found a black notebook with a black elastic and a page ribbon the color of pomegranate seeds. On the inside cover, CM and a phone number with our area code. Inside, sketches of wine bottle labels, notes to pour, and a list of restaurants. Carrie's Supper Club starred, twice, in a phrase that made my body find a chair. "Back door, 120, warm hands, the best thief." The page smelled faintly of her kitchen citrus, fire, the air around salt when it hits a hot pan, and something else, cedar, the towel. I called the number and left a bureaucracy message. "Northridge International. We have your notebook. It will be in the main office until 6 p.m., then in the overnight ops desk. Ask for Ethan." He arrived at 5:58, the way people do when they like to narrate competence. "Mateo," I said. Call me Matt, he said, smiling in the way that keeps a scale between arrogance and a story he has yet to tell. He was one of those men you can tell spent his 20s learning how to fold a jacket into relevance. Early 40s now, handsome in a way that gets restaurants to listen, hair the color of arguments wine people have about oak. He looked around our office like he was searching for someone he could rescue from organization. You found this, he said, taking the notebook. You're a gentleman. I work for a system that dislikes loose ends, I said. I work for a system that creates them, he said, grinning like he was proud of the joke. When he was gone, I typed his number into my phone and did not save it. On my way home, I drove the long way to see if it would make the short way still ours. Carrie was chopping fennel, talking to Solange about a bride who wanted peonies in February. She looked tired, more beautiful than tired, which is one of the traits the world uses to forgive women for anything. I told myself a new story about an importer and wrote a decent lie across the old one. People think airports make you cynical. In my experience, they make you romantic. There's a reason we clap when planes land in storms. We want to believe in difficult things secretly going right. 2 weeks later, the night I ran out of narratives with stable landing gear, the snow lay on the runway like an argument. We de-iced 6 planes, sent 2 back for respray, rerouted a Paris flight, and coaxed an elderly ground tug into an infirmary with more patience than dignity. At 1:03 a.m., a pilot reporting bird activity near the Southern Lights called a wildlife alert. I grabbed a coat and a handheld and went out to the perimeter road to look for the gulls who had decided we were perhaps a fish. Past the lights beyond the de-icing arches is the cargo turn. Beyond that, a fence that understands duty. Beyond that, a service lane parallel to a chain of warehouses and small, permitted Neverland's food trucks after hours, a mechanic who works by invitation only, and the back doors of 3 businesses that would rather you knew the front. I saw the car before I understood whose. Gray hatchback, familiar dent near the rear light. Carrie's. Parked next to a black SUV with its interior lit as tender as a chapel light. The door to the flower shop's back hallway was ajar. Carrie came out, a coat over her shoulders, like she wasn't sure if she intended to stay warm. A man followed. He put an arm around her and said something into her hair. She took his face in both hands and kissed him the way the city kisses the first hour without traffic. I turned off my headlights then, because I am a coward in at least one necessary way. The radio on my belt said, "Ops, wildlife dispersed," which felt like a dare. I sat there while the snow got bored of gravity and fell sideways. He walked her to her car. He waited until her taillights disappeared. He went back inside. There is a kind of dignity in thinking clearly while your heart is shopping for exit doors. I drove back to the perimeter. I took the shortest way to the control room. I wrote an incident log about imaginary gulls. At 4:20, I backed out of an argument with a field supervisor about cones. At 6 on the first train, I went home. She was sleeping. Her hair smelled like rosemary, and a word I did not want. I made coffee. She came into the kitchen, barefoot, the beautiful irresponsibility of a home you share. "How was it?" she asked, yawning. "Cold," I said. "You?" "Quiet," she said, eyes inside hers. "Matt's notebook turned up in Lost and Found," I said, pouring coffee into 2 mugs like an amateur offering communion. She blinked like I'd mispronounced a name in a foreign language. "Matt?" "The importer," I said. "Oh," she said lately. "Right. Did he get it?" "He did," I said. "He's polite." "Good," she said, quite. We looked at each other over a table that we had bought in a market where courage looked like a cake. "How long?" I asked, as if learning to ask that sentence would untangle time. She looked at the mug she wasn't drinking. 3 months, she said. Maybe 4. "I work in a building that dislikes numbers being wrong," I said. "I know," she said. "I counted 2. I told myself it was wrong until I couldn't." "Did you tell yourself you'd come home afterward?" I asked. "Every time," she said. And the honesty did what honesty does. It made me want to leave and stay in equal measure. "Why?" I asked, and hated the sophistication that had taught me to replace rage with sociology. She put her palms flat on the table the way she does when she is plating something that needs to be centered. "Because he looked at me like I was new," she said. "And because in my kitchen I am watched by people in a way that doesn't let me be a person. And because you come home tired and heroic and ask me if I'm okay with your eyes, and I say yes and we keep moving, and I wanted, she searched for the language, stupid, selfish theater. I wanted to act out being wanted when nothing wants you back at 2 in the morning except your own exhausted body on the floor. All the parts of me that operate aircraft fuel lines rose up to fight the part of me that wanted to kick a chair. Do you love him? I asked, because that's the rope people throw each other in a flood they both started. No, she said, and I believed the particular muscle in her voice. I love what I felt like I could be near him, reckless without consequences. 9 hours without my name being a menu. We could have made 9 hours, I said. We could have burned the menu. We could have, she said. We didn't. She cried and apologized for crying, and then didn't apologize for the apology, which is how I knew she had been practicing not performing. I went back to work that night with the calm that comes when you've killed the lobby music in your head. The storm left. The schedule pretended to be our friend. I watched 3 planes taxi nose to tail like polite beasts. On the concourse, a janitor sang. In the de-icing queue, a crewman told a joke so old we clapped anyway. I looked at the glass and saw my face press itself into a pane that did not request the imprint. There is a way to do this where I become a worse man. There is a way where I follow him and learn all the places where he is insecure and use them to build a small tower of my own. There is a way where I fling my version of the truth over a room like a net and drag us both until one of us drowns and the other is applauded. I chose the option airports prefer. I made a plan. It had 3 parts. Part 1, tell someone who would not use it as entertainment. I told Nate, my friend from Ops, who had once watched me argue with a wingtip about physics and remained my friend anyway. Nate listens the way metal does. No judgment until you apply too much force. He said, you get 6 weeks of being stupid and then you have to be clever. And I said, deal. Part 2, learn whether the thing is gravity or a gust. In bad weather, you don't blame the plane for what the sky is doing. You read the sky. I gave it 30 days. I didn't ask questions I intended to weaponize later. I watched the only place I had a right to watch, my own house. She slept less. She cooked more. She stepped into the shower with a relief that made me want to move plumbing into religion. She set her phone face down, then face up, then left it in the next room. And that choreography taught me more than reading would have. The night I saw her cry into a bowl of eggs she wasn't whisking, I put the whisk in her hand and didn't say a sentence that would have sounded like a sermon. Part 3, pick a language for the end of this part. You can dismiss a flight or delay it or cancel it or divert it. One looks like relief, one like indecision, one like failure, and one like a life. I decided that if she chose him, I would leave the house for an apartment near the airport with a window that could handle everything I would then use it for. If she chose me, we would attempt a delay with purpose. 6 months of a slower schedule in which our work was not an alibi. On the 29th day, she asked if we could talk at the supper club after service. I came at 10:45. The front room smelled like bread and a good crime. Her apron had a blood stain where pomegranate juice had wanted to look more dramatic. I ended it, she said before I sat. With theater, I asked, or with door locks? With all the unglamorous things, she said. Phone calls that end in silence. A set of keys returned in a small bowl because pockets felt like a lie. The part where he says he understands and doesn't. The part where he says he wasn't asking me to choose and he was. The part where I clean the floor twice because I want to clean something I am allowed to fix. Do you want this? I asked. Us? Here? This? I gestured. The room was a friend to both of us and an accomplice to one. I want the truth we're owed, she said. I want to stop being charming. I want to be ugly and chosen, or ugly and not. I can do ugly, I said. I professionally do ugly. We didn't move back to what we were, because that place had burned down quietly, and it would have been disrespectful to pretend we could walk those halls without hearing the alarms. We moved forward to the kind of repair work I deal with in the hangar, the painstaking, non-televised kind. We set rules like people who distrust their improvisation, No secrets that use shame as an airtight bag. No defensiveness spending a night in the house. No performing forgiveness for onlookers. We went to counseling with a woman who looked like everyone's kind aunt until she asked a question you couldn't pretend you didn't hear. She said, "You do not protect a marriage by never admitting you are bored." And we sat there like two people waiting for an arrival board to fix our destiny. We changed the way we worked. I stopped chasing overtime for good guy points. She cut one seating, moved the remaining to nights I was asleep, and took 2 mornings a week entirely off, which she had not done in 3 years. I started running again, a slow 5K around our neighborhood that made me feel old and proud. And she came to the track once and pretended to clap, then lapped me laughing, then came home and did a thing to a pan that made me think we would be allowed a future. In April, he came to the supper club and sat at a table with a woman whose laughter was thin enough to be expensive. He did not look at the kitchen. Carrie plated his dessert herself, pears, roasted with thyme and honey, and set it down like a teacher. He said, "Chef," because some men hide surrender in courtesy. She said, "Enjoy," in a voice that would have cut rope. I watched from the tiny bar where Solange arranges the smallest flowers and pretends to overhear things. I waited for my body to decide it needed to leave. It did not. The difference between jealousy and rage is whether the thing you're feeling thinks it's a plan. Mine did not. I tipped out the bartender double and walked home through a city that was finally willing to be warm again. We lasted. Not because the story needed it or because the world rewards the patient. We lasted because we learned that hunger isn't a critic you can silence by turning up the music. We lasted because we stopped making each other into jobs. We lasted because when she said, "I need to be witnessed without being evaluated," I started practicing what that might require. And when I said, "I need our house to have hours when no one asked me to fix anything," she put a sign on the kitchen door that reads, "Closed twice a week at noon," and she enforces it like pagan law. This sounds clean when I tell it. It isn't. Some nights she still moves her phone from one room to another in a choreography that makes something ancient in me look for an exit sign. Some mornings I still check the perimeter road as if a car might be parked there to indict us again. But the roof over us does not leak now when it rains, and when it does, we do not call someone else to stand under it for us. I did see him again once, in the place I suppose I always would, the airport. I was coming off shift. He was arriving on a flight from Toronto. He wore that handsome fatigue travelers like to imagine makes them interesting. He saw me, and his face arranged itself into the version of courtesy that enables men not to learn anything. He walked over, offered a hand I did not take. "Ethan," he said, "how are we?" "We," I said, "are not." He laughed as if I'd proven his point. Bland men get their jollies in ordinary victories. "Fair enough," he said. He hesitated. "You know, she's remarkable." "I did not require you to teach me that," I said. He looked out the window at the place where planes pull in and out of conversation with sidewalks. "You two will be fine," he said. "You're made of routine." The word he meant was loyalty. "I wish you nothing," I said, which is the closest thing to a blessing I had left. He took it as an insult. It was neither. I went home and slept 4 hours and woke to her hand on my face and the smell of bread cooling by the window and a sound from the street that might have been children arguing about a ball or angels. The city does that on purpose sometimes, coordinates your senses so you don't think you're clever for staying. In June, at the end of a day when I got a runway closed fast enough to make a landing possible, and she sent a text that read, "I made a mistake with the salt, and the customers bragged how much they loved it, which is how both our professions reward you for failing in the direction of courage." She asked if we could take a picture. She never asked that. We stood in the ivy just off our building stoop and used a timer and tried not to look like people performing happiness. The photo is bad, the light is wrong, and my eyes do a thing I hate, but it lives on our fridge under a magnet shaped like a lemon. I look at it when I'm threatening to pretend I am owed better weather. In August, we took 2 days off together for the first time in a year. We went nowhere, on purpose. We woke without alarm, put on the radio, lay on the floor like teenagers auditioning for nostalgia. She asked me to tell her one thing I'd seen at the airport that made me like people again. I told her about a man in a suit who missed his flight and instead of shouting called his daughter to say, I'm going to be late to the play. Throw a shoe at the prince for me. She laughed the way she laughed in Phoenix near a gate that didn't want to be helpful. Then she told me about a woman who cried in the bathroom at the supper club because the soup tasted like her grandmother's last sentence, and how sometimes being a chef is being a translator for ghosts. September will come and break something else. That's what months are for. The airport will shut a runway for repair. Her oven will complain. Our bodies will pretend they were built for a different century. A friend will leave. Another will arrive in a sweater that almost fits. I will sit in the control room at 3 a.m. and say into a headset, "Ops to field 3, you're clear to cross," and I'll mean both more and less than the sentence deserves. She will stand at the pass, wipe the rim of a bowl until it remembers how to be respectful, and not apologize for who she is when she is not cooking for anyone. The other night I drove the perimeter roads at sunset because I missed the sensation of being necessary to meddle. I parked near the cargo turn. The flower shop's back door was closed. The air smelled like hot rubber and something sweet from a nearby bakery that knows when truck drivers need to be remembered by sugar. I sat with the window down. A plane lifted into the orange in that way that turns grown men persuasive about grace. I thought about the worst version of us, the one where I perform injury until I am it, and the best version, the one where we build boredom into our calendar like an altar. I drove home to find her at the sink singing badly to a song that has not earned its royalties. I kissed the back of her neck, which remains the only theology I trust. I work in places you don't see. The airport at night is a body we keep persuading to breathe in its sleep. Marriage is not so different. There's the part everyone claps for, and then there's a narrow corridor with a door nobody photographs. Behind it, people doing small maintenance in the wrong shirts. Change a fuse, check a seal, listen for the sound you've taught yourselves is normal so you can hear the one that isn't. If you want a moral, I don't have one. I have a checklist, taped to the inside of my skull with the modesty of things that don't need names. Don't ignore smells. Don't schedule sorrow for later. It will make its own appointments. If you see the person you love under a bad light, wait until morning to decide what you saw. Now, if you hurt someone, tell them before the wind does. If someone hurts you, decide whether you want to be right or alive. Some days you can be both, but not as often as you think. Last week, a man left a coat in our dining room and sent a stranger to pick it up. I handed it over without ceremony and did not smell it. When I came back to the kitchen, Carrie had written the night's menu on the board. There was a lemon tart under a glass dome like a small planet. She said, "Tonight we're doing nothing special." And I said, "Perfect," and meant it the way you mean a weather prediction on a day when you'd like to not be brave. I still go to work when the city has decided to look most like itself. At 2:17 on a Tuesday, a freighter touches down like a man returning to a home he almost changed his mind about. At 2:19, the lights on the runway advance one by one like a shy army. At 2:20, I say into a radio, "Cross when ready," and somebody in a cab with a paper cup in his hand obeys. On my break, I stand at a window and look at the place where planes and people pretend to agree about time. I put my hand on the glass because sometimes you want to feel heat from an order you gave that didn't make anything worse. I think about how once I believed infidelity was a plot twist only weak characters used. Then it happened to me, and I learned it is an element like air. You either figure out how to breathe differently or you blame the wind until you're not interesting to yourself anymore. When my shift ends, I drive home on the back roads. The city gives me 5 green lights in a row sometimes, as if offering absolution without paperwork. I park and climb the stairs and open the door that knows all our names. She looks up from the table, a pen tucked behind her ear, a notebook open to a sketch for a menu we will change twice before anyone eats it. I kiss her hello. It's not a new kiss. It's the kind that pretends it doesn't know how much work it took to be ordinary again. We didn't start over. We kept going. There's a difference that only matters if you're the one holding the map. People who come to her supper club will say that the room feels safe, like the kitchen knows what you meant when you ordered. People who pass through my airport will say, if they notice at all, that everything seemed easy for once. That's the highest praise we get. If I do my job well, no one will clap. If she does hers, they will clap for the food and forget the person who made the stove obey. The timetable board at the airport doesn't lie. It will announce delays and they will belong to weather and decisions. It will say on time when the sky allows. It will never write the sentence I'm ending on here. But I will. She stayed. I stayed. We learned. And when the wind rises, as it does, I take a breath that isn't polite, and I say into the room I love, cross when ready. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you. It means a lot. New stories like this one are posted every single day, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss one. And if this story touched you, please give it a like. It really helps more people find our content.